Welcome, everyone, to the White Rabbit Podcast. I am your co-host, Matt Kraus, coming to you from Bandırma, Turkey. Your other co-host, Alpo Rosanes, who would usually be coming to you from Barcelona, Spain, but today he is traveling and couldn't make it. So anyway, dear listeners, today we have a guest on the podcast, Chrissie Bettencourt. Chrissie, welcome to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. Say hi to our listeners.
Hello, everyone, and thanks, Matt. It's a pleasure being here.
Thanks for being here. I met Chrissie via a previous guest on our podcast, Nick Richmeyer, and I'll get back to Chrissie's intro in a moment, but first I wanted to give a shout out to Nick. He, along with another guest on this podcast, Brad Ferris, did a podcast called Working Broken. I was a big fan of that podcast and listened to it regularly. Okay, so now back to Chrissie. Chrissie is from Ontario, Canada, which I think makes her the second Canadian guest we've had on this podcast. Yay to us. Nice for deepening our international roots. So anyway, Chrissie is CEO of a company called Potentiopath. They are all about helping companies thrive in hybrid and remote work environments. And what's more, Chrissie is credentialed as an associate neuroplastician, which means that she integrates the principles of neuroplasticity into her work. I'm having a hard time saying that word, neuroplasticity. So when it comes to understanding how to make our remote presentations, like our remote client presentations, our remote sales and investment pitches, stuff like that. When it comes to understanding how to make those remote presentations work for us, Chrissie is the right person for us to be talking to. And by the way, just a little vocabulary clarification. You'll hear us throwing around the term neuroplasticity a lot today. When you hear that term, think changes the brain goes through when it is in a new situation or when it is taking in new information. And Chrissie, is that a fairly accurate way for a layman like me to describe that term?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good general definition of it, and then we can dive a little bit more into that later.
Okay, excellent. Okay, and before we dive into that subject, our main subject for today, let's back up a second and finish up this intro. So, Chrissie, help me out here. Is there anything our listeners should know about you that I forgot to mention in this intro?
Well, other than some fun facts, like I was telling you before, I lived in Argentina for 12 years. So I consider that a little bit of my soul home. And I have a Portuguese background, so I'm very familiar with adapting to new environments, and both business and professional. So that's on my list of things I've done. And I'm also, just as another fun fact, a chocolatier. So I'm a part-time professor, and I actually used to teach tasting workshops and whatnot, in addition to now the teaching I do around neuroplasticity and hybrid remote environments. But that's another fun trajectory of my career in the past.
I didn't know about that part about the chocolatier thing. I didn't know about that. So how did you get into that area? I don't think I've ever met anybody who said, I am a chocolatier. So how does one get into that?
So it kind of just happened by chance, because, going back to so I'm going to go way back here. I decided to leave Canada. I needed a change of environment. So I was working for the federal government. I walked in, I quit, said, I'm done. And I sold everything. And I hopped on a plane, and one-way ticket to South America, and didn't really have a plan at all. I just figured I'd figure it out when I got there. And I ended up staying 12 years, and I ended up going to Mendoza. So I was in Mendoza, Argentina, and that is the wine area.
Okay.
Very similar to California, actually. The climate, everything is so similar to California. So I started working in the wine industry, which is a total change. and I started getting into wine tasting, and that's where I started, researching and discovered chocolate tasting as well, because I ended
Wow.
up starting to pair the two together.
Okay.
So I loved it. I loved the sensory aspects of it. It really just, tasting is something that brings you back into the present moment.
Yeah.
Um, and so I decided to get my certification, which I did through British Columbia in Canada. And I did it online. And then I just and I didn't I don't so I decided I didn't want to create or make chocolates. That's not what I wanted to focus on. I loved the tasting aspect, and I wanted to teach about the flavor profiles and all of that, because again, like I said, I really loved how it just brought people into the present moment, and people started learning new things about themselves that they didn't know before. And for me, just I thought that was fantastic. I loved it. So
And back up a second. I have one more question before we wrap up this intro. Did I hear you say the word certification? So there's
yeah,
an actual
there is a
certification for being a
certification.
chocolatier. Really? So
There
not only
is.
are you a certified associate neuroplastician, you're also a
Yeah.
certified chocolatier. Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay.
I have
So
other ones, but we won't go there. We'll save that for another conversation.
excellent. Okay. So one more thing before we get started. So, Chrissie, if our listeners want to get in touch with you after the podcast, where can they find you?
The best place is to go to potentiapath.com and reach out via the website. And also they can just email me directly at chrissy@potentiapath.com.
Okay. And let's dive into the main topic for today. And this is kind of a new angle for me. So I'm not sure where to start. So you tell me, where's a good place for us to start out today?
So I think let's start talking about what neuroplasticity is, just as in general, and how it relates to, or not relates, but why it's important within communication, so presentations and how we communicate with other businesses. So
Okay.
neuroplasticity really is essentially the brain's ability to change and adapt based on experience. So it's the reason that we're able to, learn new skills, form new habits, adapt to new environments throughout our entire life. What's interesting is that we used to think that the brain was fixed after childhood and that we couldn't
Yeah.
really learn as much, right? But studies have shown that that's not actually the case. The brain is constantly forming new neural pathways, strengthening some, weakening others. And this is what the important part of it is, based on what we repeatedly do and experience. So why this is important when we're communicating, again, like when we're creating presentations, when we're communicating with clients or potential prospects or what have you, communication is fundamentally how the brain interacts with other brains. So when we better understand how the brain processes information, how it learns to trust, and how it adapts to new situations, then we can design our communications to work with how the brain naturally interacts as opposed to against it, which
Okay.
is half the battle, right?
Okay.
So
Yeah.
we were talking about, the new kid in town theme, right? When, you've
Yeah.
got a business going into, let's say, a new market or a new area. If you're okay, if I can use the Turkish seller and the French buyer
Yeah.
as an
Go for
example,
it.
I think
Go
that would
for
be
it.
really great. So
Yeah.
when we've got a Turkish seller and want to reach out to a French buyer. So immediately there's differences already there. There's cultural differences, there's communication differences. So what happens when that communication happens, the brain, because there's an unfamiliarity aspect, the amygdala in the brain, which is this tiny part of the brain deep in the brain, it's our threat response system. So its basic job is like, there's a threat, we need to be careful.
Okay.
It does not differentiate between, let's say, a saber-toothed tiger coming at us and a social situation. It's not going to
Sure.
differentiate. It's just going to say, this is unfamiliar. That
Okay.
means it's uncertain, and then it's risky. That's basically
Okay.
the process.
Okay.
So when we've got the Turkish seller going in, right, you have to be really cognizant of how you're communicating. So the brain is going to immediately pick up on, well, first of all, it's going to, the threat response is going to be activated, right? Because it's unfamiliar, right?
Yeah.
Then it starts looking for patterns because there's pattern recognition that comes into play there. So when we don't take that into consideration, we're going up against this wall of um where the brain is like, this feels like a threat to me. And it's not
Okay.
that it's not, it's not that it's an actual, threat in terms of your
Sure.
life, as I
Yeah.
said, but it doesn't differentiate that way.
Sure, sure,
And
sure.
a lot of it's subconscious. So it's not like it's based on any prejudice or bias at all. It's just that's how the brain is wired to work because it's there to protect us. So let's
Okay.
say we take a French seller and a French buyer. You're not going to get the same interaction because there's familiarity there. There's shared cultural references, there's shared language, there's shared
Okay.
body, like even right down to body language and how you use, let's say, for example, silence or humor
Yeah.
in your communication. The brain, it just goes into autopilot. It's like, this is familiar, it's safe. It doesn't now have to focus on decoding the communication. It can focus on the value proposition and the content and the
Okay.
solution of what you're trying to get,
Okay.
what you're trying to
Sure.
communicate.
Sure.
So this is why it's important when we communicate to take those things into consideration. We want to shift. Basically, the goal is we want to shift from unfamiliar to a familiar state.
Okay. So let me interrupt you here and back up a second just to make sure that I'm following you. So if I'm this hypothetical, this Turkish, I don't know, let's say I'm selling software or something. So I'm selling software and I'm trying to sell it into France. So my competitor is also is French. So I'm Turkish, my competitor is French. Both of us are trying to sell to a French customer. So the French customer is going to perceive me as a threat. I'm triggering this person's amygdala. And if I heard you correctly, so I shouldn't take it personally. It's not personal. That's just what the brain does. And that's what the brain is trained to do. So I shouldn't take it personally. Uh, but there's a lot going on here that is signaling to the French buyer that this guy is not from around here. So my French competitor is having an easier time. We get to jump right to, things like the specs of the software and what does it do and all that stuff. The French competitor is bypassing hurdles that I am having to jump through. Is that correct?
Yes, in certain respects, yes. But that doesn't mean that you can't move yourself to a level playing field with the
Okay.
French
How do
competitor.
how do I do that? Because I can't. I wasn't born in France, so I can't spend 35 years learning how to be French. So, so how do
Yeah.
I? Yeah, give me some tips on how do
Yeah.
I overcome this obstacle?
So basically you want to start building what I call micro familiarity.
Okay.
You want to create connection essentially at the most basic level. And there's different ways that you can do that. So for example, basically if you want to make that shift from unfamiliar to familiar, you can, and I'm going to throw some numbers out here, but it's going to depend on each situation, right? And the complexity or the simplicity of it. But essentially you can shift uh, to familiar in about 3 to 7, generally speaking, positive interactions. So you want to
Wow.
create consistent positive interactions with the French buyer. And that will help the brain start to reframe, rewire its assessment of your company, right? So that's what you really want to do. And you can do this in through building those micro familiarities with the buyer. So, for
So,
example,
yeah,
no, go
go
ahead.
for it. For example, so I'm just wondering, okay, because you've thrown out some great terms here, but I'm kind of wondering how am I going to do it? These terms like micro familiarity and consistent something something. And so now I need some examples. Yeah. So keep going.
So you want to look at, for example, reference any shared experiences. So you talked about technology. So let's say you're both you're both in SaaS, right? So that's as an example. So you can use that as a shared reference. Hey, I see that you're in SaaS. I've been working with SaaS companies and start to reference similarities there, so that again, you're building the bridge to show here's some similarities that we have, right? And it's something that they understand. It's familiar to them.
Okay.
You can also look at using their language and frameworks, and I don't mean like the French language, because you might not might not be so hot in learning learning French or speaking French. But
Sure, sure.
for example, let's say they use I don't know, I'm just going to throw out an example, the phrase digital transformation. Like say that's an important aspect of what they're doing. So you want to ensure that you use those phrases that they use in your communication with them to show that you understand what they do, what their business is.
Okay.
Also, too, you want to show some cultural fluency. So this is where it's important to do some homework, do some research, like so that you can show that you understand how business is done in France, because there's always going to be some differences. So little things like that is where you can start building those micro familiarities, those similarities. The other thing, though, too, so that's to start building similarities. But then there's another aspect where we want to reduce the cognitive load. So and that's a terminology. So basically, we want to reduce how much the brain has to work in this interaction, so that it's a little bit more at ease and in more the autopilot mode that I talked about.
Okay.
And that's where the communication comes in, like straight up communication. So
Okay.
simple, direct language, for example, when we're communicating either verbally or in writing or presenting,
Hmm.
right? We want to structure the conversation, because the brain craves predictability. So again, it's putting it at ease. When we set the agenda and say, this is what we're going to talk about and what order, they can relax a little bit. So the brain doesn't have to work at saying, okay, what's going to come next? What's going to come next?
Mm.
It can focus on
Okay.
the content, because there's a predictability there, right?
Okay.
And then
Okay.
visual aids, right, is another big one. Like the
Yeah.
brain processes, I think it's like visuals 60,000 times faster or something like that,
Yeah. Yeah.
compared to verbal or text. So
Okay.
those little things can really help shape the interaction and make it a positive experience. And it's all those little touch points. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the presentation itself, but the email communication, the phone call, all of those things count in creating those positive experiences.
Okay. And you mentioned the meeting should have some structure to it. Are we talking about, like, do I need to present like a written agenda, or can I just give them the broad stroke? This is kind of what we're going to talk about. First, we're going to do A, then we're going to talk about B, then we're going to talk about C. Or do I need a really detailed agenda to accomplish this?
No, as long as as you just said, you lay the structure out,
Uh-huh.
that's what's important, so that
Okay.
they understand and they know what's going to come last. Basically, the order of what you want to touch on. That's not to say then you can't, during the conversation, start talking about a couple of other things, but at least they know beforehand what that structure looks like. You don't need, a very formal, detailed agenda necessarily, but as you said, if you just lay the structure out, and also too, part of that is if you've got more than one person in the meeting or the call or what have you, who they are and what they do, so that they also know the roles. That's important
Okay.
as well.
Okay. And let's switch gears here for a second to a similar but significantly different topic, and that is, let's say that it's not intercountry, it's just a new customer, but it's a
Hmm.
remote presentation, because
Yep.
that's your business, is helping companies make this transition. So while I've got you on the line here, I want to dig into that subject a little bit. Uh, let's say, for example, I have a new customer, so we haven't closed business yet. We're still at the point of me making a presentation and a proposal and hoping that they say yes. So we haven't signed on the dotted line yet or anything. So it's pretty early in the relationship. But all of our conversations are remote. They're all over Zoom or something. And I'm emailing the proposals to them and stuff like that. So what are some of the things that I can do to help improve or tighten the relationship at this point?
So there's two main things I want to touch on. How you present. So there's a couple of important points there, and then the connection that takes place from a remote standpoint and how you can create that connection remotely during those, that call or that presentation is important.
Yeah.
So let me start with how you present first,
Okay.
because that's going to be important. So again, using visuals, you want to show, not just tell, because it's easier. And this is, based on remote. It goes for both, actually, both, whether they're from somewhere else or not. But definitely remotely, you want to use visuals wherever you can, and simple
Okay.
visuals, because you want to make sure that it helps them engage with you, especially on a screen, because otherwise you're going to lose them.
Sure.
And so that's important.
Okay.
You want to follow also a structure like problem solution and then proof. It's logical, it's clear, and then it's going to help them, again, especially in a remote situation, stay focused, because they know they can predict the flow, so that they don't have to start again thinking about what's coming next. And then when you add that variable into a remote, you're gonna lose them. So that's important. And then third, and I see this a lot, so especially in communications and pitch decks, a lot of pitch decks, or pitches, you want to make it about them, not you. So you want to structure the conversation around, like, for example, you don't want to go in and say, okay, we do this. This is what we've created. We have this many clients. This is what it's like. We. You don't. You want to get away from that, right?
Okay.
Because you're going to lose them. You want to say instead, oh, I'm just going to throw out an example, right? You're focused on better decision making within your organization. This is how we can help you. Boom. Then the reason that's important is because it shifts them from listening, like a passive stance. Because when you start talking about we do this, we do that, we, they're passive. They're not engaged. Whereas if you start bringing them in and saying, this is what you're working on, this is how we can help, they're engaged. And you want that in a remote situation, because you're going to lose them. So how you present, how you frame things is important. From a connection standpoint, this is where everybody tends to sort of veer off in different directions. But there's an element of in-person communication where there's something called a mirror neuron in our brain. So that's what fires when we're interacting with people. So for example, like when you see someone smiling, you just automatically smile. That's the brain cells firing, right?
Yeah.
And it's just like an automatic response. We smile when we see somebody else smile. So that's the mirror neurons, and you're connecting with the person. That they're usually stronger in person. When you're remote, we don't have all the visual cues that we would normally have in an in-person. So you want to recreate that remotely.
Okay.
And there's different ways that you can do that, right? Because otherwise, again, you're not going to get that connection. And you really want that connection if you're pitching to somebody or you're trying to get that deal, right? Because they want to be able to trust you and have a connection with you. Otherwise, they're just not going to sign.
Okay. And let me interrupt you and back up a second to something you were talking about a few moments ago. You were talking about, don't make it all about you. Rephrase your stuff to make it about them. We hear about this all the time in sales, but if I hear you correctly, and tell me if I'm wrong here, but if I hear you correctly, you're saying that is additionally important in a remote presentation because it causes the other person, your potential customer, it causes their activity in their brain,
Mhm.
or it causes them to become engaged or somehow. And since you're remote, you kind of are starting with a disadvantage in that regard. So this rephrasing things to make it about them is not just a good sales technique, it's also making them more engaged. Did I hear you correctly on that?
That is correct. It's
Okay.
fundamental when you're looking at remote interactions,
Okay. Interesting.
in my opinion, because
Uh-huh.
you're just going to lose them otherwise. They're not going to feel engaged, and ultimately that's what you want. I mean, even if you just look at organizations in general, you want your employees engaged, right? It's the
Uh-huh.
same thing when you're pitching to somebody, or,
Yeah.
you want the other person engaged in what you are presenting and what you're speaking about. And so when you start making it about them and not you, they are going to just naturally become engaged because the brain starts firing, and they start thinking about, oh, they start jumping ahead. Oh, this is how this could potentially work for me
Okay.
and the company, and they start thinking about the solution, right? As
Okay.
opposed to, they start detaching when we start talking about, we do this, we do that, like, and they're
Yeah.
just, that's why I say you're going to lose them. So
Uh-huh.
it's
Okay.
really important from a remote standpoint to get that engagement. And that's the first part of the engagement, is just how you frame your presentation. And then after that, the actual interaction online is where you really want to make sure you're engaging them and creating that connection, because because the brain has to work harder to make that connection as opposed
Yeah.
to in person. So you want to make sure you're doing that in your presentation. And
Okay.
different ways of doing that, like camera on.
Yeah.
um
And, absolutely. A very basic comment for the most. This is definitely a remedial comment. Make sure your camera is on. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay, so
yeah.
we're gonna have to wrap up in a few minutes here, but before we wrap up, dig into we passed over this mirror neuron comment that you
Mhm.
made. We passed over that pretty quickly. So if I was hearing you correctly, so mirror neurons are basically, we do what we see other people doing. So if somebody smiles, we smile. If somebody laughs, we laugh. If somebody plays with their hair, we tend to play with our hair. Is that what you mean by mirror
Yeah,
neurons?
basically it's when we perform an action and we observe someone else performing that action at the same time. So yes,
Okay.
that's smiling is a good example. And it creates connection.
Uh-huh. So
Mirror neurons are how we, learn empathy too, and just social connection.
yeah, and how can I utilize these? Let's go back to our example of me making a sales presentation to a potential customer. So other than saying, "Hey, buy from me, give me some money," and hoping that kicks off the mirror neurons that cause them to give me money.
You're
So
stuck in heaven.
how can I put these mirror neurons to work for me in my sales presentation?
There's a few basic things that people can do. Number one, like I said, make sure the camera's on, because we lose that. We need the visual. And so we want to make sure that you're looking straight and have the camera on so you can see the person. But also two is using so you see, actually talk, I should have been Italian. I talk a lot with my hands. But um the use of body language, right? So talking with your hands is actually a good way, because it helps people focus back in, right?
Okay.
Using affirmative statements, so engaging them, saying, "Oh, I appreciate your point." Right? So responding to something that they say, "Oh, I can see the value in what you just said," or something, so that you are taking what they've just said and bringing it into the conversation, because then you're bringing them in and you're connecting with them, right?
Okay. Okay.
That's really important as well.
Uh-huh.
you want to make sure to little things like make sure that they're not muted. So the sound, you want to hear the certain nuances in their tone of voice, right?
Yeah.
Really start paying attention to those little things, and just get them engaged that way.
Okay.
Um, as just basic standard things that you can do in any remote presentation.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So we've got to wrap it up for today. So this has been a great conversation, and I wanted to thank you again for joining us, Chrissie.
Thank you for having
And
me.
yeah, it was a pleasure. And so we'll wrap things up for today. And so hopefully at our next episode, Alper's travels will be over, and so it will be Alper and I and our guest. And so we will hopefully then, fingers crossed, Alper and I will see you next time. So thank you very much. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Bye bye.